Philip lived in a small village with his wife, Amelia. He was a hunter, spending his days in the thick forest that surrounded their home. Amelia was a quiet, hard-working woman. She took care of their small garden and managed their modest hut. Their lives were simple but peaceful. They didn't have much, but they were content. One evening, while Philip was deep in the forest hunting, he found a woman lying on the ground. She was covered in dirt, her clothes were torn, and she looked like she had been wandering for days. Without thinking twice, Philip picked her up and carried her back home. When Philip brought the woman into their home, Amelia's heart sank. She couldn't hide her discomfort. The woman, whose name was Nina, had a strange presence. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But Philip said Nina was lost and needed their help. Amelia stayed quiet, but deep down, she didn't trust a stranger now lying in their home. The next day, as the sun rose over the village, Philip prepared to go hunting. He grabbed his bow and arrows and told Amelia he would return before nightfall. Amelia, still feeling uneasy, asked if she could go with him. She didn't want to be left alone with Nina, but Philip told her there was nothing to fear and that she should rest. He promised to be back soon. Reluctantly, Amelia watched her husband leave and disappear into the forest. She was left alone with Nina, whose presence made the air feel heavy. Amelia tried to distract herself by working in the garden, but the memory of what she had seen the night before haunted her. She had seen something in Nina's room, something unnatural, something that should not be. As Amelia knelt in the garden, pulling weeds, a chill ran down her spine. She felt someone watching her. Slowly, she turned around. Nina was standing there, her dark eyes fixed on Amelia. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes burned with something strange. She stepped forward, moving slowly and deliberately. Amelia's heart began to race. She remembered what she had seen the night before, Nina's true form. Her body had changed into a snake. Amelia had been too afraid to speak of it, but now the truth was right in front of her. "You should have minded your business," Nina said, her voice low and filled with anger. "You saw what you weren't supposed to see. And now, I won't spare you." Amelia's blood ran cold. She tried to move, to run, but her feet wouldn't obey. Nina's body began to change. Her legs twisted together, growing longer, turning into the massive, scaly form of a snake. Her eyes glowed yellow. Her mouth stretched into a wicked smile. Her skin shimmered as the transformation finished. Before Amelia could scream, Nina lunged. The giant snake coiled around her, squeezing with terrible strength. Amelia struggled, gasping for air, but the more she fought, the tighter the grip became. Her vision blurred. Her strength faded. Her body went limp in the snake's grasp. With one final squeeze, Nina killed her. After the dark act, Nina slithered away. Her serpent form disappeared, and she left the house as if nothing had happened. She walked into the village market with a calm face, acting as though her hands were clean. She smiled at the vendors and greeted the women buying and selling food. She blended into the crowd like just another villager. Back in the forest, Philip was focused on his hunt when a strange feeling came over him. It was like the wind had whispered that something was wrong. His heart raced. A chill ran through him. It wasn't a normal feeling. He had spent years in the forest and always trusted his instincts. This time, they were screaming at him to go home. Without waiting another second, Philip dropped everything and ran back to the village. His feet moved fast, but the dread only grew with every step. By the time he reached his home, he was out of breath, but there was no relief waiting for him. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of Nina or Amelia. Panic set in as Philip rushed inside, calling for his wife. No answer. He searched every room, but the house was empty. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped into the backyard. There, in the garden, he found Amelia. She was lying motionless on the ground, her body lifeless, her skin pale. Philip dropped to his knees, shaking her, hoping she was still alive, but her body was cold. His hands trembled as he looked at her, trying to understand what had happened. Desperate to save her, Philip picked up Amelia's body and ran as fast as he could to the village healer. The healer was an elderly man who had treated people in the village for many years. He was known for his wisdom and his knowledge of both natural and spiritual remedies. Philip laid Amelia down and begged the healer to save her. The healer examined her carefully, his face growing more serious by the second. Finally, he looked up at Philip and slowly shook his head. It was too late. Amelia was already gone. She had been bitten by a dangerous snake, and the venom had spread through her body, killing her. Philip was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The village never had a problem with snakes. In fact, snakes were rare in the area. People didn't die from snake bites. And to make things worse, nobody had ever seen a snake as deadly as this one. The healer was puzzled too. He said he had never seen anything like it. Something about the bite felt unnatural, like there was more to it than just a tragic accident. Devastated, Philip returned home. His heart was heavy with grief, and his mind was full of questions. As he approached the house, he saw Nina sitting on the porch, tears running down her face. She was crying like she had just heard terrible news. Philip, still shocked from what had just happened, looked at Nina in confusion. He hadn't told anyone about Amelia's death yet, and Nina wasn't even home when he found her. He hadn't said a word. How could she possibly know? Philip asked Nina why she was crying. Through her sobs, Nina said she was mourning Amelia's death. This caught Philip off guard. He stared at her, confused. How did she know? He hadn't told anyone yet, and he was sure Nina had been at the market when he came home. He asked her how she found out. Nina quickly lied, saying she had heard it from the women at the market. They had supposedly told her about Amelia's death while she was shopping. But something about her story didn't sit right with Philip. He looked at her closely, thinking about everything that had happened. Nina had left the house before he even discovered Amelia's body. There was no way she could have known before he did. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Philip's suspicion grew. How could the women at the market know about Amelia's death if it had just happened? No one else had seen her body except him, and the healer hadn't told anyone yet. As Nina continued to cry, something about her tears felt fake. Philip's mind began to put the pieces together. He remembered the strange feeling he had in the forest that morning, the sense that something was wrong. And now here was Nina, somehow knowing about his wife's death before anyone else. A few days later, it was time to bury Amelia. Philip gathered a small group of family members and close friends to say goodbye. But not everyone came. Many villagers, including some of Philip's own family, had warned him about Nina when he first brought her home. They said something about her didn't feel right, that there was a darkness around her. But Philip had ignored them. He believed Nina was just a lost woman who needed help. He hadn't wanted to listen to anyone else. Now, many of those people refused to attend the burial. They were angry with him. They felt he had ignored their advice, and now Amelia had paid the price. Some whispered behind his back, saying that if only Philip had listened, his wife would still be alive. Others didn't even whisper. Their cold stays and their absence of the burial said more than words ever could. The burial was a small, quiet event. The air was filled with sorrow, and the few people who did come stood in silence as Philip lowered Amelia's body into the ground. His heart was heavy with grief. After Amelia's burial, Philip tried to return to his normal life, but everything had changed. The empty space she left behind was too big to ignore, and in the middle of his sorrow, something else began to happen. Nina, who had stayed in his home, started to get closer to him. At first, Philip tried to keep his distance. He was still mourning and couldn't imagine loving someone again so soon. But Nina was always there, offering comfort. She spoke softly and told him things he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. She told him that she loved him, that she was the one who truly cared for him, and that Amelia's death had been fate. At first, Philip pushed back. How could he love someone so soon after losing his wife? But Nina was persistent. She cooked for him, cared for the house, and became part of his daily life. Slowly, Philip's heart began to soften. He told himself that maybe he deserved to be happy again. And before long, he found himself madly in love with Nina. The more time Philip spent with her, the more his life seemed to improve. His hunting trips became more successful. Where he used to return with just a few animals, now he came back with plenty: deer, antelope, and wild boar. They seemed to come to him easily. Philip took the animals to the village market and sold them, making a lot of money. It wasn't long before he became one of the wealthiest men in the village. His hut was now full of the rewards from his hunts, and the villagers started to notice. People who once cursed Philip for bringing Nina into the village, who had refused to attend Amelia's burial, now came to him with open hands. They asked for help, for loans, for favors. At first, Philip didn't know what to do. He remembered how they had turned their backs on him. But he also knew what it was like to struggle. He was tempted to help them, to show he was not the man they thought he was. But Nina warned him. She told him not to give his money to anyone. She whispered in his ear that those people didn't care about him when Amelia died, that they had mocked him. Now that he was rich, they only wanted to take what he had earned. Nina's words were like poison, slowly changing how Philip thought. She convinced him that no one in the village was truly his friend, that they only cared about his success. Philip listened to her. Each time someone came to his door, asking for help, he turned them away. At first, it felt strange, but soon it became easier. He had Nina by his side, and she made him believe they didn't need anyone else. Together, they had everything: wealth, happiness, and peace. The villagers began to whisper. They said Philip had changed, that the strange woman he lived with had made him into someone else. But Philip didn't care. He was richer than ever before. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful. He had Nina, who seemed to bring him nothing but good fortune. The warnings from the villagers, the suspicions they had about her, all faded into the background. Philip was too blinded by his new love and success to see the dark shadow creeping into his life. Then something strange started happening. Every time Philip prepared to go hunting in the morning, Nina would stop him. She asked him to wait a few hours. At first, he didn't think much of it. She would say he needed to be patient, that going too early wouldn't bring him the success he wanted. Then Nina would go into her room, lock the door, and tell Philip never to come in, no matter what. Philip found it strange, but he didn't ask too many questions. He trusted Nina and believed her when she said it was for his own good. Behind that locked door, Nina would transform into a massive snake, her true form. She would slither out through a hidden hole in the wall, unnoticed by anyone. Once in the forest, she would head straight to the spot where Philip usually set his traps. There, in her powerful snake form, she would kill animals like deer, wild boar, and rabbits, making sure they ended up in Philip's traps. Hours later, after finishing her task, Nina would return home and change back into her human form. She would unlock the door and tell Philip it was time for him to go hunting. Not knowing what had just happened, Philip would grab his gear and head into the forest. When he reached his traps, he was always amazed at how full they were. Every time, there were more animals than before, deer caught in snares, rabbits tangled in nets, and wild boars stuck in pits, all ready for him to bring home. At first, Philip didn't think much of it. He thought he was just lucky. Maybe his hunting skills had improved. The more animals he caught, the more money he made at the market. People rushed to buy his fresh meat, and his wealth kept growing. Soon, Philip was the richest man in the village, and people talked about how quickly his fortune had changed. But something strange was happening, and deep down, Philip knew it. In the past, hunting had been hard. Some days he came home with nothing. Other days, just one or two animals. But now, every time he checked his traps, they were overflowing. It didn't make sense, but he didn't want to question it. All he cared about was the money. The market women loved his meat, and he had more than enough to sell. Nina, watching from the shadows, smiled as her plan unfolded. She knew Philip was too blinded by his success to see what was really going on. Every time he went hunting, Nina had already filled his traps. As long as he didn't ask questions, her secret was safe. The villagers kept whispering about Philip's sudden wealth, but he ignored them. He told himself it was hard work and skill that brought him success. He didn't need anyone's approval. One day, while Philip was at the market, a nosy neighbor named John came to the house. John was known in the village for sticking his nose into other people's business. He asked questions, spread gossip, and always had something to say. This time, he came straight to Nina with a suspicious look on his face. He knocked on the door and waited, arms crossed. When Nina opened it, she stood quietly in the doorway. Without wasting time, John began talking. He told Nina that he knew who she really was. He said the gods had revealed her true form to him in a vision. He claimed she wasn't an ordinary woman, but a snake in disguise, sent to the village with dark intentions. John didn't know exactly what her mission was, but he warned her that the gods would not let her harm the village. His words were sharp and filled with accusations. He called her names and said it was no surprise that strange things had started happening after she arrived. Nina stood there silently, her face calm, as John spoke. She didn't argue or defend herself. She just watched him with cold, dark eyes, her expression unchanged. John took her silence as proof that he was right. He puffed up with pride, thinking he had exposed his secret. After throwing a few more insults away, he left, stumping down the road and muttering to himself about uncovering her true plans. 2 days passed after John's visit. Life in the village went on as usual. Then something unexpected happened. John went to his farm, as he did every day, to check on his crops. The sun was high, and the air was hot and dry. As John walked between the rows of plants, he suddenly froze. Right in front of him was a large snake, coiled and ready to strike. Before he could move or call for help, the snake lunged and bit him on the leg. He screamed in pain, stumbling backward and clutching his leg where the fangs had sunk deep. The venom spread quickly through his body. Within minutes, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. By the time some villagers heard his cries and ran to help, it was too late. John was already dead. News of John's death spread fast. People were shocked and scared. Snakes were rare in the village. No one could remember the last time someone had been bitten, let alone killed. By one, the villagers gathered in small groups, whispering about what had happened. Many began to panic. They started to believe something evil had entered their village. The strange events that had followed Nina's arrival suddenly seemed connected. First, Amelia had died from a snake bite, even though no snakes lived near them. Now, John, who had accused Nina of being a snake, was also dead, killed by a snake in broad daylight. It was too much to ignore. Rumors spread quickly. People whispered that Nina must be cursed, that she had brought bad luck and death to their once peaceful home. Some said she was a witch using dark magic to control Philip and kill anyone who stood against her. Others believed the gods were angry and had sent snakes as punishment. The villagers had had enough. They gathered and agreed to take their concerns to the king. They believed only the king could stop what was happening. A group of elders and respected villagers went to the palace. They told the king everything: the sudden deaths, the rumors about Nina, and the fear that had taken over the village. They begged the king to do something before it was too late. The king listened and agreed that something had to be done. He sent a messenger to summon Nina to the palace. When Nina arrived at the king's court, she appeared calm and graceful, as if none of the accusations bothered her. The king looked at her, and to everyone's surprise, he was immediately taken by her beauty and charm. He liked her right away. Any plans to question had disappeared. The villagers had hoped the king would find the truth, but he didn't ask about the deaths or the rumors. Instead, he praised Nina for her calm and polite behavior. He said she didn't look like someone capable of doing anything wrong. Nina left the palace unharmed. She went back to Philip's house without punishment or blame. The villagers were shocked and confused. They had hoped the king would help. Now, they were back where they started, with more fear and no answers. When Nina got home, Philip was waiting. He had heard all the rumors, and though he tried to ignore them, they were getting harder to forget. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He finally gathered the courage to ask Nina about the rumors. He wanted to know if any of them were true. Were people really dying because of her? Was she somehow connected to the snake bites? Seeing the worry in Philip's eyes, Nina burst into tears. She cried and told him that everything was a lie. She said the villagers just wanted to ruin her, that they were jealous of how much he loved her and how successful they had become. She swore she had done nothing wrong, and that the deaths were just terrible accidents. Philip, who still cared for her deeply, was torn. He didn't want to believe the worst. He remembered how happy she had made him, and how much his life had changed since he arrived. Her tears and words softened his heart, and once again, he believed her. He told himself the villagers were just superstitious, and looking for someone to blame. Soon, Nina began secretly visiting the king behind Philip's back. She would sneak out whenever Philip was at the market or in the forest, going to the palace to see the king. The king had become even more enchanted by her since their first meeting, and their visits became more frequent. Nina was careful to keep it a secret from Philip, but secrets like that are hard to keep forever. One day, Philip heard whispers in the village. People were talking about how Nina had been seen at the palace regularly. At first, he didn't want to believe it, but the rumors grew louder. Even his friend began warning him that something wasn't right. Philip couldn't ignore it any longer. When he confronted Nina, he asked her directly if the rumors were true. Had she been seeing the king behind his back? Nina, as usual, tried to deny it. She began to cry and said it was just more lies from villagers who hated her. But this time, Philip wasn't so easily convinced. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. He began to wonder if Nina had been hiding more from him than he realized. They had a big fight that night. That same month, something strange also happened in the forest. No matter how hard Philip tried, he couldn't catch any animals. His traps were empty every time. This had never happened before, and it made Philip even more suspicious. He started to wonder if there was a connection between Nina and his hunting success. Could she have been the reason his traps were always full? And now, because of their fight, had she stopped helping? The more Philip thought about it, the more it made sense. Since Nina had entered his life, everything had changed. He had become rich. His traps were always full, and the villagers were afraid of her. But now, after their argument, it was like all his luck had run out. No animals, no money, no success. It felt too strange to be a coincidence. One day, after weeks of tension, Philip apologized to Nina, hoping to make things right. And just like that, the next time he went hunting, his traps were full again. The forest seemed alive with animals. Philip couldn't ignore the strange connection anymore. It was as if Nina had the power to control his fate. The thought made him uneasy, but he kept it to himself. Meanwhile, in the palace, the queen had also heard the rumors about her husband's affair with Nina. It was no secret that the king had been acting strangely ever since Nina started visiting. The queen confronted the king, demanding to know if the rumors were true. She asked him directly if he had been seeing Nina in secret. The king, not wanting to admit the truth, denied everything. He told the queen there was nothing between him and Nina, and that people were just spreading lies to cause trouble. But the queen didn't believe him. She had seen the way he looked at Nina. She knew there was more to the story than he was saying. Despite the king's denial, the rumors kept spreading. The whole village was talking, and both the king and Philip were caught in the middle. Nina's influence over both men was growing, and everyone could see it. The once peaceful village was now full of suspicion, lies, and fear. One afternoon, the queen, tired of the whispers, went to Philip's house. She had heard enough talk about Nina and the king, and decided to speak directly. She spoke firmly and told Philip to warn Nina to stay away from her husband. She was done with the lies and the gossip. She would not let Nina destroy her marriage. Nina, who had been nearby, overheard the conversation. She listened from another room, a cold smile creeping across her face. She didn't respond or confront the queen, but in her mind, plans were already forming. She would not let anyone, not even the queen, stand in her way. A few days later, tragedy struck the palace. The queen, who had been healthy and strong, suddenly collapsed in her chambers. Her servants rushed to help, but it was too late. She died quickly and without explanation. The village was shocked. Whispers filled the air again. Many people began to suspect that Nina had something to do with the queen's sudden death, but no one dared to say it out loud. A few weeks later, the king gathered his closest advisors and guards. He made a surprising announcement. He planned to marry Nina. The news shocked the village. Everyone knew the king had just lost his queen, and now he wanted to marry Nina. It seemed unthinkable, but no one questioned the king. His word was law, and even his advisors stayed silent. When Philip heard the news, he was filled with rage and confusion. He couldn't believe that Nina, the woman he had brought into his home, was now going to marry the king. The thought of losing her was too much. Furious, he confronted her. He demanded answers. How could she betray him like this? Nina, as always, stayed calm. She told Philip not to worry. She said everything was part of her plan. Then she asked him a question. Wasn't he interested in something greater? Didn't he want more than what he had now? Philip, still angry but curious, asked her what she meant. She looked him in the eyes and asked if he had ever dreamed of becoming king. Philip was surprised by the question. He admitted that yes, the thought had crossed his mind, but he didn't see how it could ever happen. Nina smiled and told him to be patient. Soon, he would understand. She said everything was under control, and all he had to do was stay quiet and trust her. Philip didn't fully understand her plan, but her words stirred something inside him. The idea of power, of becoming king, excited him. Nina was already planning her next move. She had worked her way into the lives of both Philip and the king. Now she was close to getting something far bigger than either of them could imagine. All she needed was time. And as long as Philip stayed loyal, her plans would soon come to life. Philip, still confused and full of doubt, agreed to stay quiet. He didn't know exactly what Nina was planning, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, something that would change everything. Some of the villagers, unsettled by Nina's sudden rise and strange things happening in the village, decided to seek help from the village priest. They were afraid of Nina, but they believed the priest, with his wisdom and connection to the gods, might be able to tell them who, or what, she really was. A small group gathered their courage and went to the priest's shrine. When they arrived, the priest, an old man who had served the village for many years, welcomed them with a serious look. He could feel their fear. The villagers explained everything, the strange deaths, the gossip, and how Nina was about to marry the king. They begged the priest to use his powers to find out the truth and help stop whatever evil she was bringing to the village. But to their shock, the priest's face darkened. He looked more afraid than they had ever seen him. He told them he could not reveal anything about Nina, not because he didn't know, but because even speaking about her could bring danger. The priest trembled as he warned them that Nina was no ordinary woman. She was far too powerful, and no one could stop her. Not yet. The villagers left the shrine feeling helpless. Even the priest, the one they had hoped could save them, was too afraid to do anything. Meanwhile, back in the village, the king went ahead with his plans and married Nina. The ceremony was grand, with all the king's men and chiefs present. The village was full of whispers, but no one dared speak against the king's decision. Nina, now queen, had secured her place in the palace, and her control over the king grew stronger. Philip watched it all in silence. Though Nina had told him to trust her, it still hurt to see the woman he once loved marry the king. As the days went by, he kept a low profile. But not everyone in the village was kind. One of Philip's neighbors, a man who had never liked him, came to his house just to mock him. He laughed and called Philip a fool for letting the king take his woman. He said Philip should have been more careful and never trusted someone like Nina. Philip, filled with anger and shame, listened as a neighbor insulted him. The words hurt, but deep down, Philip knew there was nothing he could do. He had chosen to believe Nina, and now everything was slipping away. Even though Nina had promised him something greater, he felt like he had lost everything. As the neighbor walked away, still laughing, Philip sat quietly, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought back to when life was simple, before Nina came into it. Now everything had changed, and he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to face what was coming. Now that Nina was queen, her power grew even stronger. She wasted no time showing it. One day, she sent for the same villagers who had gone to see the priest. They came to the palace, shaking with fear. They didn't know why they were being called. When they arrived, Nina didn't waste any time. She warned them to be careful. She told them she knew exactly where they had gone and what they had asked the priest. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were cold and dangerous. The villagers were shocked. How did she know they had gone to the priest? None of them had told anyone. Fear filled their hearts as they realized just how powerful Nina really was. On the way home, they didn't say a word. Once they were far from the palace, they made a vow. They swore never to speak of Nina again. Not to each other, not to anyone. From that day on, they lived in fear, pretending everything was normal. But inside, they knew Nina was watching. Meanwhile, Nina continued to control the king. One evening, as they sat together in the royal chambers, she told him she had an idea. She suggested that Philip, her former husband, be made the head of the palace guards. She praised Philip's strength and loyalty, saying he was perfect for the job. Under her spell, the king agreed without hesitation. He trusted Nina completely. The news spread fast through the village. Many people, especially the elders, were angry. They couldn't understand why the king would make such a decision, especially knowing about Nina and Philip's past. The elders gathered and decided to speak to the king. They wanted him to rethink his decision and be careful about giving Philip so much power. When they went to the palace and shared their concerns, the king was furious. He stood up and told them to mind their own business. He said he loved his wife Nina and trusted her fully. He didn't care what anyone thought about Philip's new role. The elders, shocked by the king's outburst, left quietly. They were deeply worried, but there was nothing they could do. The king was blinded by his love for Nina, and no one dared to challenge him anymore. As time passed, it became clear to everyone that Nina was the one controlling everything in the palace. The king did whatever she asked without question, and the villagers grew more afraid of her each day. The once peaceful village was now full of quiet talk, secrets, and fear. No one dared to cross Nina. Those who had tried were either dead or too scared to speak. Philip, now the head of the palace guards, was unsure about his new role. He knew Nina had placed him there, but he still didn't fully understand her plan. All he could do was go along with it, hoping the promises she made would one day come true. But deep down, he wondered if he was being led down a path he couldn't escape. One night, as Philip lay in his room, Nina came to his door. Her eyes glowed strangely, and her voice was calm but firm. She told Philip to follow her to the king's bedroom. Confused, Philip asked why. Nina smiled and said the king wasn't home. This, she said, was his chance to get closer to her, and to power. "Don't you want to become king?" she whispered. Philip looked at her, his thoughts racing. She explained her plan. If he kept sleeping in the king's bed with her, the king would become sick and eventually die. Since the king had no children, once he was gone, Nina would marry Philip, making him the new king. Excited by the idea, Philip agreed. It was a dream he had never thought possible, and now it seemed within reach. From that night on, whenever the king was away, Philip sneaked into the king's bedroom to be with Nina. He believed her, thinking this was his path to greatness. Days turned into weeks, and soon the king began to fall ill. The village healers were confused. Nothing they tried worked. The king's condition grew worse each day. The villagers didn't know what was happening inside the palace, but they worried about the future of the kingdom. After months of sickness, the king died. The village mourned his death. But Nina wasted no time. She quickly declared herself ruler, saying the king had no heir. The villagers were shocked by her boldness, but they were too afraid to speak against her. With the king gone, Nina's control over the village grew stronger than ever. Philip, however, was furious and confused. This wasn't what she had promised. She had told him he would be king. But now, it looked like she never planned to share the throne. Anger and betrayal filled him. One night, Philip confronted Nina. He demanded to know why she had lied. Why wasn't he king, like she said? Nina, calm as ever, looked at him with a cold smile. Without warning, her body changed. Right before Philip's eyes, she turned into a massive snake. Her scales shined in the dim light. Her eyes glowed as she slithered toward him. Philip backed away in fear, his heart racing. But then, just as suddenly, Nina shifted back into her human form. She stood before him, calm and powerful, and told him the truth. She was not just a woman. She was a demon, sent to destroy the village. All the strange deaths, including Amelia's, were her doing. Philip was frozen in fear. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Then Nina warned him. Her voice was cold. If he ever told anyone what she had done, or who she really was, he would join his wife in the grave. Shaking, Philip knew she was serious. He was trapped, and he couldn't stop her. From that moment on, Philip lived in constant fear. He was no longer proud or powerful. He was just a prisoner in her plan. Nina, now ruler of the village, had everything under control. Her plan had worked, and there was nothing Philip could do. One day, not long after she took full power, a young man arrived at the palace gates. He was dressed simply and carried himself with calm confidence. When allowed into the palace, he introduced himself as Prince Moses, the true heir to the throne. Nina was shocked. She had always believed the king had no children. But now a man stood before her, claiming to be his son. The elders were called to the palace. Two of them, wise and respected, confirmed that Prince Moses was truly the son of the late king. They explained that the former king had hidden his son's identity to protect him from enemies who wanted the throne. By keeping his son's existence a secret, the king hoped to keep him safe. Nina's face grew dark. All her hard work, her lies, her tricks, was now at risk. She had nearly taken everything, and now a prince she didn't know existed was going to ruin it all. The elders, realizing they had been fooled, stripped her of power immediately. The village had their true king now. Nina's rule was over. Philip stood by and watched. He had no words, just regret. He had followed Nina, hoping for power and glory. But now, all he saw was loss. The elders acted quickly. Nina and Philip were to be banished from the palace forever. Many villagers, angry over the chaos, wanted them sent to the evil forest, a cursed place where no one ever returned. The forest was dark, filled with spirits and dangerous creatures. Being sent there meant certain death. The people wanted justice for all the pain Nina had caused. But Prince Moses, now king, made his first royal decision. He chose mercy. He said Nina and Philip would not be sent to the evil forest. Instead, they would be cast out to live as commoners, with no power and no title. Though he didn't yet know all of Nina's crimes, King Moses followed his kind heart and spared their lives. The villagers were unhappy. They wanted revenge, but they didn't dare go against the new king. Nina and Philip were let out of the palace. The power, the wealth, the life they had once enjoyed was gone. Now, they were nothing but outcasts. As they walked away, Nina's eyes burned with anger. She had lost, for now, but inside, her dark power still lived. Philip, on the other hand, was full of regret. He had followed Nina blindly. Now, everything she promised was gone. He saw clearly that he had been nothing but a pawn in her game. The village, though relieved, remained cautious. They didn't know what Nina might do next. But for now, they were glad she and Philip were gone. One evening, while Nina was out of the house, Philip made a decision. He had to escape. His fear and regret had grown too strong to ignore. He quietly packed his few things, careful not to make a sound. He knew that if Nina caught him, she might kill him. Once ready, Philip ran as fast as he could. He headed for his mother's village, far away. He had no real plan. He just wanted to escape and start over, far from Nina and her evil ways. Later that evening, Nina returned. She could feel something was wrong. The house felt empty. She searched the rooms and realized Philip was gone. Her rage boiled. Philip, the one person she thought she could control, had left her. Furious, she rushed to the palace. She wasn't ready to give up power, not even to the prince. At the palace, Nina tried her usual tricks. She tried to charm Prince Moses, hoping to control him like she had others. But he wasn't like the rest. He saw through her lies and refused to give in. This made Nina even more angry. In a fit of rage, she pulled a dark object from her bag, something filled with evil power. She was about to use it against the king and take back the throne by force. But before she could act, something powerful hit her from behind, as if the spirits themselves had stepped in. Nina fell to the ground, lifeless. The palace guards and elders rushed to her. They saw what had happened. Nina's evil had finally caught up with her. The villagers, hearing the news, felt relief. The woman who had caused so much fear was finally gone. Her body, filled with dark magic, was taken to the evil forest. There, it was buried deep in the most cursed part, so her spirit would never return. With Nina gone, the village could finally breathe again. King Moses ruled with wisdom and kindness. He brought peace back to the land. The people no longer lived in fear. Slowly, life returned to normal. The strange events became stories, lessons passed down through generations. They remind us that no matter how clever or powerful someone may seem, evil always brings its own end. Nina's greed and lies brought harm to many. In the end, she couldn't escape the price of her actions. Phillip, too, learned a hard lesson. Moral of the story: choosing the wrong path, even when it looks good, can lead to deep regret and loss. It's important to make wise choices and stay true to your values. Chasing power and wealth through evil will only bring destruction in the end. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss more powerful and meaningful tales. Thank you for your support, and stay blessed.